chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello, hello, hello. Here is not the Dallas Petroleum's Club. Here is the podcast DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State, with Manuel Ochsenreiter. That's me. I am editor-in-chief of the German news magazine Zuerst. And on the other side, Mateusz Piskorski. Mateusz, hello.
Yes, hello from Poland, from weekly journal Myśl Polska.
The first most important question. Did you watch Dallas in the 1980s, or wasn't it broadcasted in Poland back then?
Well, I guess that it was broadcasted everywhere,
right,
including, I don't know, North Korea, yes? So probably there's no one in the world who haven't heard about this. This is a part of another topic, Hollywood imperialism.
That is under guarantee a topic we will speak in one of the future podcasts. Absolutely,
definitely, yes. We have to.
And for our listeners, just to imagine, Mateusz Piskorski and me, we are both sitting on distance, of course, since we live in Corona times, in our bunkers wearing J.R. Ewing hats. So nothing can happen today.
Yes, definitely we feel safe, and we hope that our listeners feel safe too.
So, as we started with oil, we will speak today about oil and, of course, also gas, and about resources and what influence the politics or the resources have on geopolitical decisions and actions, right?
Yes, I guess it's quite an interesting topic, particularly in the context of an agreement within the OPEC Plus group, which is kind of a historical agreement, as several people claim, yes?
Yes, and we live right now in a very weird time, because a lot of people, if you look into social media, they feel like living again in decades ago, when the oil or the benzene was very cheap and they couldn't go out so often as well. So it is quite weird. Please tell us more about this agreement you were mentioning, since I think the oil policy is a policy which is really affecting the life of any citizen, not just in Europe, but most probably in the whole world.
Definitely, but there were quite differing explanations of the situation which we have now. I mean, you know that the most expansionist economic policy when it comes to exporting oil is now waged by United States, of course. Yes. United States trying to enter the European markets as well with their oil and gas. Of course, it's interconnected. I mean, the prices of oil and gas are interdependent, which means that the US has tried to build a group of countries, the so-called New Europe bloc, in Central and Eastern Europe, which would first import, first and foremost, the American gas from the fracking technology, coming from the fracking technology. Secondly, this block of countries, of Central European countries, from the Baltic states in the north to Croatia in the south, would somehow try to block the energy projects, common energy projects between Russia and Western Europe, particularly Germany, by the way,
yes.
Including, of course, first and foremost, of course, the Nord Stream project. So that's why at a certain moment, I guess that the Russian authorities have decided to go for a war with the American fracking oil and gas companies. And this was the first step, I suppose. It was a step taken before the times of pandemics and coronavirus limitations. So at that time, probably the Russians, as well as Saudi Arabians, for instance, they have counted quite calculated quite well, and they have counted that, the Americans can use the their technology for oil and gas if oil stands over $45 US dollars per barrel. Mm-hmm. If it becomes cheaper, then all their fracking technology would be completely useless, and several companies in US would go bankrupt.
We have to mention in this context that the barrel oil was once more expensive than $100 a barrel, and we are now, I don't know what is now the precise, but
around to 2024, I guess. Yes. Yeah. So I think this was the first step. Yes. So it is a kind of perhaps not geopolitical but geoeconomical step, and one should perceive what has happened from this point of view. No one, of course, knew about coronavirus. I mean, about the scale of the pandemics. And no one realized that, of course, the demand for oil, the world demand for oil, will so dramatically decrease in the coming weeks. That's why I guess that this OPEC agreement, it's, in my opinion, a kind of truce between commercially warring sides for the time of coronavirus limitations. But on the other hand, if you perceive the whole agreement from the point of view of the history of oil market and gas market, it seems to me that it's the first time in contemporary history where practically all oil exporters, I mean, not only OPEC, but OPEC Plus means Russia, means United States, means several smaller countries like Mexico, for instance, like Venezuela, have come to a common agreement. What do you think about it?
Yes, I think that is quite unique, and I wanted to lead this topic also to another field, to another level. What is interesting, since you mentioned Nord Stream 2, you know about the debates we have inside Europe and about Nord Stream 2. So the debates are going from those who are totally in favor of these pipelines and those who are totally against these pipelines. So there is really a big gap between these two camps. But what is interesting, since we are speaking here about geopolitics and to a geopolitical podcast, and since geoeconomics and especially the politics regarding natural resources is always an integrated part of geopolitics. I think there is no geopolitics without without the inclusion of resources and the policies towards resources. But what I wanted to discuss with you, did you notice that the European debates about Nord Stream 2 are conducted by, at least by the governments and by big parts of mainstream media, without any kind of connection to geopolitical facts and truths? So to give you an example, Germany is one of the, let us call it, the very last industrialized nations in Europe, where Germany is still producing a lot. Germany is still in the top rankings of export nations, and that means always real products and not just like financial products or so. So it's a productive nation with tremendous hunger for energy. And Germany is at the same time a country with almost no resources, so we can forget the coal, and we can I think also forget even the German oil platforms we have somewhere in the North Sea. So Germany depends a lot on the import of energy. And when it comes to the debate of Nord Stream 2, you are not hearing a lot of arguments for energy diversity by mainstream politics and also by the big part of mainstream media. The argumentation of those who are opponents of Nord Stream 2 is almost always only political, and then even the most disgusting way of political argumentation, the moralic political argumentation. And when someone starts moralically argue in politics, I think at 90% we can agree that there is a big lie behind it. So, for example, we have German politicians, especially from the CDU party, the governing party, or from the mainstream media, which is very close to these positions, which say we cannot accept Russian oil and gas since that would support Putin's dictatorship in Russia. So no word about energy diversity. These people who are in favor for Nord Stream 2 are as well in favor for US-American energy imports. It is about the diversity of imports. So what do you think about the level of debates in Europe when it comes to to secure the energy supply for the European industry?
It's a general question about the level and quality of debates in European countries. I guess that such debates about Nord Stream, for instance, should be taking part with the participation of people who are real experts on that. Yes.
Yes.
We have several politicians using such stupid, let's say, moral arguments, but they are not actually moral, just stupid and primitive. Like you told, by buying Russian gas and oil, you are supporting the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And
it's like little children debating with each other. There is no reason.
Yes.
It is crazy. Yes.
It's not only. I mean, it's not only in CDU. I think it's also in Die Grünen.
Yes, of course.
As well. Yes, particularly in Die Grünen in Germany. You have the same. It's quite strange because the same arguments as the arguments of the Greens in Germany are used in Poland by the neoconservative government. So they are all talking the same pseudo moral language, which is very primitive, and I don't think it can somehow affect the masses, or it can somehow determine the future of big energy projects. But anyway, on the other hand, a lot of people who are doing this, who are using this primitive argumentation, are simply sponsored or supported in many ways by important players on the market of gas and oil. Yes, so
Mateusz, I really hope so that these people are sponsored, because if they are not sponsored, it would mean that we face the pure and cleanest stupidity we can face. So that would make at least reason. If they are supported or paid by someone. Because, I mean, we don't have just these debates when it comes to Russian gas and Russian oil. We have the same debates when it comes to China. In Germany, we had the same debates when it came to the trade with Iran.
Yes, exactly, about the Iranian oil as well, yes?
Yes, and also about any kinds of economic and business cooperation with Iran. And you have to see that Iran is a big market. It has more than 80 million inhabitants. From these are, I don't know, the vast majority is younger than 30 years. It's a very young and hungry nation. And to limit yourself as an industrial country like Germany by some stupid, mostly not at all informed arguments, not to go into business, because of, really, one has to say, some political invented bullshit, to say, this is a mullah republic and we shouldn't, and so on. So that is really, I see this, honestly speaking, as a danger for not just the interests of Germany, but also the interests of Europe. If people dictate us with who we are allowed to go into business and who not, who are arguing on the level of a 6-year-old primary school student.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, I guess that the problem with Germany is not so big when it comes to Nord Stream, because regardless all these rhetorics, as far as I know, the Chancellor and the whole government supports the idea, yes?
Yes, until now, yes. And the Greens you mentioned, which are, you were totally right, which are on the total rage against Nord Stream 2, they are not in the government, or not in the federal government at least. What is for now a big luck, yeah? And the Social Democrats, who are in the government with Angela Merkel, they have traditionally a more pro-business and pro-industrial ideology, since this simply secures the jobs in Germany, but also in whole of Europe.
Well, the difference is that if the difference between the Greens, which are opponents of Nord Stream, and the Polish neoconservatives, which are also opposing Nord Stream project, is as follows. The Greens would buy energy supplies if they would come to power from Greta Thunberg, I guess, yes?
Yes, of course, from the plug.
the Polish neocons are buying energy supplies from the US, yes, which is several times more expensive than buying it from Russia or Iran. But still, it's a politically motivated decision, yes? So I don't know, Manuel, what is better, to be an idiot or to be sponsored or corrupted, yes? This is
thank God we two are none of both.
Yes, this is a good philosophical question for today, yes?
Yes.
When you compare different countries. Yeah. Anyway, coming back to Nord Stream, because as you see, it has dominated our discussion. Coming back to Nord Stream, just today I have read that the Russian specialized ship, which is specialized in building gas pipelines under the sea, is coming closer and closer to the Baltic. It's already somewhere in the Atlantic coast of Africa, so probably soon they will continue the project, and well, it's as far as I know, it's just a matter of a few months to finish and to complete all works. Yes.
Then we should have an eye on the Polish Navy, right?
Yes. There's no such a thing as Polish Navy, fortunately for the project.
No military secrets here. No military secrets now.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
But yes, we are talking about trade, about business, and well, the question, coming to our next topic, the question is, you told that all this oil market thing affects lives of ordinary people. It's obvious, and it will even affect us more in the future, as several forecasts tell us that after this coronavirus pandemics, people will use more and more individual transport, which means that we'll have again traffic jams in our cities, of course, but the people will be also paying more attention to the prices of oil in the future. And this it is quite a paradox, of course, yes, but this might save some oil exporting countries from a deep economic crisis, I guess, in the future. Concerning the coming crisis or the continuing crisis, because I guess we already have this crisis, yes?
Yes.
So as we discuss about the cities, the big cities of Europe, of United States, mainly of the West, but not only. I mean, the whole civilization is the urbanized civilization now, of course. We can also talk about another threat for the system, which is springing out of the idea of urban guerrilla, which might again take place in different places of the world as the crisis deepens. What do you think about it?
Yes, I think there is absolutely there is this danger when we see the thin line between protest and violence. What we can observe, or we could observe for now many months in France. We spoke already about the Yellow Vest, but also when we see what might happen in case the supermarkets and the groceries cannot provide anymore the offer, what is expected by the people. And I think we saw this in Sicily when people were storming groceries and supermarkets. that there might be sooner or later organized, more organized groups than only public uprisings. And the concept of urban guerrilla is very interesting, since it is not a new concept. You know that in Germany, the Rote Armee Fraktion, the RAF, which was keeping us in a really hot time after 1977, in the hot autumn, what was called there, that they were trying to make the concept of urban guerrilla really popular.
Yes, and they had some theoretical, also achievements
Yes.
in it, I guess. And however, of course, the conditions are now totally different. Yes, so this urban guerrilla movement would have to be also based on the movement of digital dissidents. Of those who would be able to destroy the surveillance infrastructure used against the citizens of the big cities. Yes,
absolutely. Yes.
That would be also the problem. But in the future, yes, you mentioned Italy by the way. So the general outcome of the crisis in those countries which are unable to cope with the crisis will be, let's say, the thing which is sometimes called as failed state or partly failed state in different areas. Yes, I have just studied an article and some expert opinions of Italian professors from Oxford University who have noticed that in the southern, but also in the central, to a lesser extent, part of Italy, the traditional mafia structures are taking the role of the state during the times of crisis. Yes, so they are now giving the people food. They are now paying the people some, let's say, welfare and social money. Yes, because the state does nothing, because the state becomes more and more bankrupt in such situations. Yes, so the same might happen also in big cities as well. What do you think? There will be a kind of alternative structures of a grassroots organization, of a, local dissident bloc or part of the city which would be out of state control.
We see in Europe already, it's also not new, we see it since years, two developments which are contradicting themselves on the first glance, but what fits quite well. We see the state going out more and more from social topics and social fields, for example, that a picture we see in Germany very often. Germany is really one of the richest countries in Europe. Are old people, pensioners, which are collecting bottles from trash bins to give them back to the supermarket, because you get for a bottle some 10, 20, 30 euro cent, to somehow better their pension by doing this. So this is a picture from the big cities in Germany, from any big city, from Berlin, from Hamburg, Munich, Stuttgart, Cologne, and so on. So the state, we have private initiatives for school children who don't get a warm meal for lunch. So there are organizations which are providing then a warm meal when the parents don't care, or they cannot afford, or they are both at work and the child cannot go home. So we see their private initiatives already being very active. We have even some initiatives which are very close or even cross the line to civil disobedience, like those who are going to supermarkets, to the trash bins, since supermarkets very often throw food which is still good. So, but it's theoretically still in the property of the supermarket. So theoretically it is stealing what these people do. Yeah? But so there is a big movement of these people. I think they call it to container because they go in the trash container and get the stuff. And on the other side, so this is the development when the state is going step by step out of the functions the state is there for. And on the other side, we see, like the topic we spoke in our last podcast, the state arming itself in the security sphere against public uprisings. So the militarization of police forces, the public monitoring, the surveillance techniques, which are increasing in high speed, we have to say today. I just read that, of course, now because of the corona crisis, that in Germany they discussed tracking software for mobile phones, which is not anymore installed by an app, but by an update of the Android system, for example. So you cannot even choose anymore if you want to have this tracking app or not. So these are all things we have. On the one side, the state is doing a withdrawal out of vivid state functions, and on the other side, militarization and massive increase of the security measures. And I think that speaks a lot for the development you described.
Yes, and all these developments will become even more obvious when we come into the deep phase of the crisis, of the current crisis. I have just thought that it would be worthy to quote some data published today. It's the data of Oxfam Center, which means a center which studies the level of poverty in the world. And according to it, the whole crisis, the whole economic crisis and recession will bring additional 20% of the global population to the state of poverty, which means that it will be more than 30 million people only in Europe, yes? Mm-hmm. Only in Europe. Of course, there will be a lot more on other continents. And who will be affected by the crisis mostly, by the economic crisis, by the social crisis, by the even psychological crisis we have discussed before? The urban people, yes? Mm-hmm. Not the rural population, which will somehow, let's say, even in hardest times, yes, it will simply manage to produce and to sell some food.
Yes, exactly.
Or to do some small services, the so-called gray zone without registration, without paying taxes. It's much easier to organize it in the rural areas, yes, or with even a barter and an exchange trade, yes, in such areas. But the hardest strike of a possible crisis on all possible levels will come in the big cities, will come for the urban population, which means that, as we have already told, there will be certainly a place for additional unrest, social unrest, violent protests, and so on. But if the crisis would be really deep, I really expect that in some of the biggest cities, there might be, let's say, independent areas created, areas controlled by local people, and not by the central institutions of the state. I mean, something like it was before, of course, it was built on a cultural basis, let's say, or counter-cultural basis, like it was Christiania in Copenhagen in the past, yes. But it might be a possible scenario as well, of course, depending on the seriousness and, let's say, the time the crisis will be striking all of us.
The Copenhagen example shows also very well that was only possible because they went into an agreement with the state. And I think that is possible, or will be possible, anywhere in Europe. We had in Berlin for a long time the topic of the so-called squatters, people who were occupying houses, empty houses, which were neither renovated or nothing else. So that was a movement coming from the far left to occupy empty houses, where we lived in this weird situation that on the one side we didn't have enough space to live for families and for people, and on the other side a lot of empty houses which were owned by investment funds or bank houses and so on. So eventually the squatters, the occupiers of these houses, went into types of agreements with the state. So the state was trying to get them out first with police and so on. Then it didn't work out. and eventually went into some type of rent agreements and agreements that they can stay. And I think that's quite possible also on other fields, not necessarily coming from the far left, but simply from people who are totally unideological, but organize themselves in fields where the state is not willing anymore or simply not able anymore to provide that kind of service.
Yes, and sometimes if the state will feel that it's bankrupt itself, it might also delegate some of its powers and duties to local communities. Yes, so as you have mentioned, there might be even a kind of agreement. I mean, it's not necessary that the only way to getting such, let's say, autonomy, urban autonomy, as a result of guerrilla, yes. But it could be also achieved by agreements, by a compromise between local structures of different districts of the cities and so on, with state structures, provided the state structures will understand, or the leaders of the state structures, of course, will understand that, it would be for their own benefit because they are going bankrupt and they are not able to provide several services to the people themselves, yes?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I have to be now the party breaker because our time ended now for this
That's
podcast.
Good. Let's introduce the German discipline when it comes to the time we are taking from our listeners in the times of quarantine.
Ordnung muss sein.
Genau.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our listeners. And
thank you very much.
We
will hear you soon.
We will come back very soon, exactly. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.